Most people think their biggest struggle is life itself, but Buddhism teaches something far more dangerous. Your real struggle is the mind that never stops fighting reality, the endless overthinking, the invisible fear, the constant voice inside your head that turns small moments into emotional suffering. You try to rest, but the mind keeps running. You try to feel peace, but your thoughts keep pulling you back into fear, regret, anxiety, and imaginary problems that do not even exist yet. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop living in reality. You begin living almost entirely inside your own mind. You smile around people while secretly feeling exhausted inside. Your body is here, but your attention is trapped somewhere inside mental noise. And the frightening part is, you may have lived this way for so long that inner chaos now feels completely normal. But what if your thoughts are not showing you reality clearly at all? What if the mind has been quietly rewriting your entire experience of life? What if the voice inside your head is the very thing stealing your peace, your joy, and your ability to truly feel alive? Tonight, you may finally begin seeing the invisible prison that has been controlling your life from within. And once you truly see it, you will never look at your mind the same way again. Your mind secretly rewrites reality and traps you inside fear, illusion, and overthinking. Most people believe they are seeing life clearly, but they are not seeing reality itself. They are seeing reality through the emotional filter of their own mind, and the mind is constantly rewriting everything. A small problem becomes a life crisis. A simple misunderstanding becomes emotional pain for days. One uncomfortable moment becomes endless overthinking at night. The mind takes ordinary situations and quietly fills them with fear, meaning, and emotional suffering. That is why two people can experience the exact same situation, yet suffer completely differently. One person lets the moment pass naturally. The other keeps replaying it again and again inside the mind until it becomes emotional torture. This is how suffering slowly grows, not always from life itself, but from the stories the mind keeps creating around life. Think about how many times your mind made you afraid of something that never even happened. How many nights were destroyed by worries that never became real. How many times you imagined rejection before anyone rejected you. How many times you convinced yourself people secretly disliked you while they were simply busy living their own lives. The mind has an incredible power. It can create invisible worlds inside your head and then force your body to emotionally live inside those worlds as if they are completely real. Your heart begins racing. Your stomach becomes tight. Your chest feels heavy. Your peace disappears, not because danger truly arrived, but because thought created the feeling of danger. This is why overthinking becomes so exhausting. The body does not always know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. So even while sitting safely in a quiet room, the mind can make the body suffer as if something terrible is happening. And after years of living this way, many people become trapped inside mental fear without even realizing it. They wake up already stressed. They walk through life already anxious. They expect problems before problems even appear. Slowly, the mind trains them to live in survival mode instead of peace. Buddhism teaches that the uncontrolled mind is like water during a storm. When water is disturbed, it cannot reflect anything clearly. And when the mind is constantly disturbed by fear, attachment, comparison, and endless thinking, it also loses the ability to see truth clearly. Everything becomes emotionally distorted. A delayed message feels personal. A mistake feels permanent. A bad day feels like a bad life. One fearful thought creates 10 more fearful thoughts. And before long, the mind creates suffering out of moments that were originally small and temporary. This is why awareness is one of the deepest teachings in Buddhism, because awareness allows you to step back and finally observe the mind instead of becoming lost inside it. For the first time, you begin noticing your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. You begin seeing how quickly the mind creates stories, how quickly it assumes, how quickly it predicts disaster, how quickly it pulls you away from reality and into fear. And something powerful happens the moment you start observing the mind carefully. You realize that not every thought is true, not every emotion is reality. Not every fear deserves your trust. This realization changes everything, because now there is space between you and the thought. Before, the mind spoke, and you immediately obeyed. Now, the mind speaks and you observe. That small pause is the beginning of inner freedom. Now you can ask yourself, is this thought actually true? Is this situation really as dangerous as my mind is making it seem? Am I suffering because of reality, or because of the story my mind created about reality? And many times, you will discover something surprising. The suffering was not coming from life itself. It was coming from the fearful interpretation created inside your own head. This is why Buddhist wisdom teaches people to become aware of the mind before trying to change the world. Because when the mind is unclear, everything appears painful. But when the mind becomes calm, life begins looking different, softer, slower, lighter, more peaceful. The world may not completely change overnight, but your relationship with it begins changing deeply, and that transformation begins with one simple realization. You do not have to believe every thought your mind creates. Endless thinking quietly steals the present moment and disconnects you from real life. The greatest tragedy of the human mind is not only that it suffers, but that it almost never stays where life is actually happening. Right now, in this moment, in this breath, the mind is always somewhere else, thinking about tomorrow, replaying yesterday, imagining problems, rehearsing conversations, worrying about situations that may never happen. And while the mind keeps wandering endlessly through fear, memory, and imagination, real life quietly passes by unnoticed. This is why so many people feel emotionally disconnected from their own lives. Not because life has completely disappeared, but because their attention is trapped somewhere inside endless thought. Their body is here, but their mind is somewhere far away. They sit beside people they love, while secretly fighting invisible battles inside their head. They walk through beautiful mornings without noticing the sky. They eat meals without tasting them. They hear words without truly listening. Even during moments of rest, the mind continues running like a machine that no longer knows how to stop. And slowly, this constant mental movement steals the peace that could have existed in ordinary moments. Buddhism teaches that suffering becomes stronger when the mind loses contact with the present moment, because the present moment is the only place where life truly exists, not in yesterday, not in tomorrow, not in imaginary futures created by fear, only here. But the mind fears being here, because the present moment is silent, and silence feels uncomfortable to a restless mind. Most people are so used to constant mental noise that stillness almost feels dangerous. The moment life becomes quiet, the mind immediately searches for something else to think about. Another fear, another memory, another problem, another emotional story. It does this because the mind believes constant thinking creates safety. It believes that if it keeps analyzing everything, it can somehow prevent pain from happening. But in reality, constant thinking usually creates more suffering than protection. Think about how many peaceful moments your mind has ruined by overthinking. You finally have a calm evening, and suddenly the mind brings back an old memory. You finally start feeling happy, and the mind whispers fear about losing it. You finally begin healing, and the mind starts reopening old emotional wounds again. This is what an unconscious mind does. It interrupts peace. It pulls you away from reality and drags you back into psychological noise. And after years of living this way, many people forget what true presence even feels like. They no longer know how to simply sit quietly without needing stimulation, without checking something, without scrolling, without distracting themselves, without mentally escaping the moment. That is why modern life feels so emotionally exhausting for so many people. The body rarely gets true rest because the mind never becomes still. Even late at night, the thinking continues. The body lies in bed, but the mind keeps traveling through fear, regret, fantasy, anxiety, and unfinished emotional conversations. And eventually, people become tired not only physically, but spiritually and emotionally as well. Buddhism teaches that awareness brings the mind back home. back to this breath, back to this moment, back to reality itself. Because when awareness becomes stronger, you begin noticing how often the mind tries to leave the present. You begin catching the moments where thought steals your peace. You begin seeing how quickly the mind creates unnecessary suffering through endless mental movement. And slowly, something beautiful starts happening. Life begins slowing down again. Simple moments begin feeling alive again. You start hearing things more deeply, feeling things more fully, experiencing moments without constantly mentally escaping them. The warmth of sunlight feels different. Silence feels softer. Conversations feel more real. Even ordinary life begins carrying peace again. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because your attention finally returned to where life was always happening. Here, now, this moment, and perhaps this is one of the deepest Buddhist truths of all. The mind keeps searching everywhere for peace, while peace has always been quietly waiting inside the present moment itself. But you can only experience that peace when you stop abandoning the present through endless thinking. Because life is not happening inside your worries. Life is happening now, and the more present you become, the more alive you finally feel again. Most of your suffering begins the moment you resist life instead of accepting it. One of the deepest reasons people suffer is not because life is always painful, but because the mind constantly fights reality. It argues with what already happened. It refuses to accept what cannot be changed. It keeps saying, "This should not have happened. They should not have treated me like this. My life was supposed to look different." And slowly, this invisible resistance becomes heavier than the original pain itself. Life naturally contains difficult moments. People leave, plans fail, bodies become sick, relationships change, dreams collapse. Nothing in this world stays the same forever. Buddhism teaches this truth very clearly. Everything is temporary. Everything changes. Everything rises and eventually fades away. But the human mind does not like change. It wants permanence. It wants control. It wants life to move exactly according to its expectations. And when reality moves differently, the mind begins suffering deeply. Think about how many times you suffered because life did not match the picture inside your head. You expected someone to stay forever, but they left. You expected happiness after achieving something, but emptiness still remained. You expected life to become easier by now, but new struggles appeared, and instead of allowing reality to move naturally, the mind begins resisting what already exists. It replays the pain repeatedly. It keeps asking why. It keeps trying to mentally change the past, but no amount of thinking can undo reality. No amount of emotional resistance can rewrite what already happened. This is why so many people stay emotionally trapped for years, not because pain lasts forever, but because resistance keeps feeding the pain again and again. The event may have ended long ago, but the mind continues reliving it every day, and eventually, the suffering no longer comes from life itself. It comes from the inner fight against life. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is the beginning of peace. But many people misunderstand acceptance. They think acceptance means weakness. They think acceptance means giving up. But true acceptance is not surrendering your life. It is surrendering the unnecessary inner war. It is finally seeing reality clearly, instead of emotionally fighting it every moment. Acceptance means understanding that some things are beyond your control. You cannot control every person. You cannot control every outcome. You cannot control how life unfolds. You cannot stop change from happening. And the more desperately the mind tries to control the uncontrollable, the more exhausted the soul becomes. Look carefully at nature. The trees do not resist the seasons. The sky does not resist the rain. The ocean does not fight the waves. Everything in existence moves naturally with change, but the human mind constantly says, "This moment should be different." And because of that, people disconnect themselves from peace. Sometimes the mind resists sadness. Sometimes it resists loneliness. Sometimes it resists uncertainty. But resistance does not remove these emotions. It only adds tension on top of them. Now there is pain plus fear of the pain, sadness plus resistance to sadness, uncertainty plus panic about uncertainty, And this is how suffering multiplies inside the mind. Many people spend their entire lives emotionally arguing with reality. They cannot accept aging. They cannot accept endings. They cannot accept silence. They cannot accept that some questions may never receive answers. And because of this, their mind never truly rests. But something beautiful happens when acceptance slowly enters the heart. The inner tension softens. The mental fighting becomes quieter. The mind no longer wastes all its energy resisting life. And for the first time, you begin breathing differently. You stop forcing reality to become something else. You stop demanding that every moment feel comfortable. You stop expecting life to always move according to your desires. Instead, you begin flowing with life instead of fighting against it. This does not mean pain disappears overnight, but suffering becomes lighter because now there is space around the pain. Now there is wisdom inside the difficulty. Now there is understanding instead of constant resistance. Buddhism teaches that peace does not come from controlling life perfectly. Peace comes from learning how to remain calm even while life changes around you. And this is one of the hardest lessons for the human mind to learn, because the mind always believes peace will come after everything becomes perfect, after every problem disappears, after every fear is solved, after life finally behaves exactly the way it wants. But life will never remain perfect forever. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be change. There will always be moments beyond your control. So if your peace depends on controlling everything, peace will always feel temporary. Real peace begins when acceptance becomes stronger than resistance. When you finally stop fighting reality internally, when you stop reopening wounds that life is already trying to heal, when you stop demanding certainty from a world built on change. And perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of freedom a human being can experience. The ability to sit peacefully with life exactly as it is, without needing every moment to become different before allowing yourself to feel calm inside. The voice inside your head is not the real you. Awareness is. There is a voice inside your head that has been speaking for almost your entire life. A voice that comments on everything. It speaks when you wake up in the morning. It speaks before you sleep at night. It follows you into conversations, into relationships, into silence, into fear, into every difficult moment of your life. Sometimes it judges you. Sometimes it scares you. Sometimes it reminds you of painful memories you were trying to forget. And sometimes it convinces you that you are not good enough. Most people never question this voice. They simply assume, this is me. But Buddhism teaches something extremely deep and life-changing. The voice inside your head is not your true self. Because if you can hear the voice, then there must be something deeper silently listening to it. That silent presence is awareness. Awareness is the part of you that notices thoughts. It notices emotions. It notices fear. It notices anger. It notices sadness. But awareness itself remains untouched beneath all of them, like the sky watching storms pass through it. The storm changes constantly, but the sky remains open and still. In the same way, thoughts constantly change. One moment the mind feels hopeful. The next moment it feels afraid. One day it says you are valuable. The next day it says you are failing. The mind changes endlessly, yet awareness quietly remains beneath every mental movement. The problem is that most people become completely identified with the voice inside their head. When the mind says, you are a failure, they believe it. When the mind says, nobody truly cares about you, they emotionally collapse into the thought. When the mind says, your future will go wrong, the body immediately fills with anxiety, and slowly, people begin building their entire identity around temporary thoughts and emotions. This is why human suffering becomes so deep, because the mind never stops producing mental noise, fearful thoughts, angry thoughts, jealous thoughts, negative thoughts, hopeless thoughts. And if you believe every thought automatically, you become emotionally controlled by whatever appears in the mind that day. One negative thought can ruin an entire morning. One fearful idea can steal sleep for hours. One memory can reopen emotional pain you thought had already healed. This is why Buddhism places such deep importance on awareness, because awareness changes your relationship with the mind itself. Before awareness, the mind speaks, and you immediately obey. The mind says panic, and you panic. The mind says worry, and you worry. The mind says hate yourself, and you quietly begin believing you deserve suffering. But awareness creates space. Now you begin observing thoughts instead of drowning inside them. Now you notice the voice, without becoming completely trapped by it. This is the beginning of awakening. Not awakening from life, but awakening from unconscious identification with the mind. For the first time, you begin realizing that thoughts are simply mental events passing through consciousness. They are not permanent truths. Just because the mind says something does not automatically make it real. Think about how many thoughts you have believed in the past that later proved completely false. The mind said you would fail, yet you survived. The mind said the pain would last forever, yet life continued moving. The mind said you were broken, yet healing slowly appeared. Thoughts come and go endlessly, but awareness remains, and the more connected you become to awareness, the less power the mind has over your peace. This does not mean thoughts completely disappear. Even deeply peaceful people still experience thoughts. The difference is that they no longer become imprisoned by every thought that appears. They observe, they breathe, they allow the thought to pass naturally, like clouds drifting across the sky, without fighting them, without clinging to them, without building an identity around them. This is one of the deepest forms of inner freedom a human being can experience. The ability to sit quietly with your own mind, without becoming controlled by every emotional wave that passes through it. And slowly, something beautiful begins happening inside you. The voice in your head becomes softer, not because you forced it to disappear, but because you stopped feeding it with constant belief and emotional reaction. Now there is more silence, more space, more calmness, more clarity. You stop reacting instantly to every fear. You stop believing every insecurity. You stop treating every thought like absolute truth. And for the first time in a very long time, you begin experiencing moments of real inner stillness, moments where the mind becomes quiet, and awareness simply watches life peacefully. Buddhism teaches that this awareness has always been inside you, even during your most painful moments, even during anxiety, even during heartbreak, even during confusion. The peaceful observer was always there beneath the noise, but your attention was trapped inside the voice, instead of the awareness listening behind it. And perhaps this changes everything. Because once you realize you are not the voice inside your head, you stop allowing every thought to control your identity. Now there is distance between you and the noise. Now there is understanding. Now there is freedom growing quietly inside your consciousness. And slowly, the mind stops feeling like a prison, because awareness finally becomes stronger than the voice that once ruled your entire life. Your attachment to thoughts is quietly destroying your inner peace from within. The human mind does not only create thoughts, it becomes attached to them. And this attachment is one of the deepest reasons people lose their inner peace without realizing it. Most people are not suffering only because painful things happen to them. They are suffering because the mind keeps returning to those painful thoughts again and again and again. One memory becomes a prison. One regret becomes an identity. One emotional wound becomes a story the mind keeps replaying every single day. And slowly, the person stops living in the present moment entirely. They begin living inside old thoughts, old pain, old fear, old emotional attachments. This is why Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. Not only attachment to people or possessions, but attachment to mental stories. Some people wake up every morning replaying the same thoughts they carried yesterday, the same fear, the same sadness, the same anger, the same emotional conversations that already ended long ago. And because the mind keeps feeding those thoughts with attention, the suffering stays alive. Think about this carefully. The original event may have lasted only a few minutes, but the mind repeats it for years. A breakup happened once, but the mind relives it 1,000 times. Someone insulted you once, but the mind keeps reopening the wound every night. You made one mistake years ago, but the mind still punishes you for it today. This is how attachment quietly steals peace from the heart. The mind becomes emotionally addicted to certain thoughts without realizing it. Even painful thoughts can become familiar, and the mind often prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar peace. That is why some people secretly hold on to sadness, because sadness has become part of their identity. Some people hold on to anger because it gives the illusion of strength. Some hold on to guilt because they believe they deserve punishment. Some hold on to fear because fear makes them feel prepared for pain. But all of this slowly poisons inner peace from within. The mind becomes heavy, the heart becomes tired. Life begins feeling emotionally exhausting, not because every moment is painful, but because the mind never stops carrying emotional weight from the past. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky. They are not meant to stay forever, but attachment turns passing clouds into permanent storms. And many people spend their entire lives trapped beneath storms they unknowingly keep feeding. Every time they replay the pain, the emotional wound grows stronger again. Every time they return to the same fearful thought, fear deepens. Every time they mentally relive the past, they pull themselves away from the peace available in the present moment. This is why letting go is one of the deepest spiritual practices in Buddhism, not because memories disappear, not because emotions magically vanish overnight, but because peace becomes impossible when the mind keeps gripping every painful thought so tightly. Letting go does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not mean becoming emotionless. It simply means you stop carrying unnecessary suffering inside your mind every single day. You stop feeding thoughts that destroy your peace. You stop reopening wounds that life is already trying to heal. You stop identifying yourself with every painful story the mind repeats. And slowly, the emotional weight begins becoming lighter. At first, this feels uncomfortable because the mind is used to holding on to things, used to replaying, used to analyzing, used to mentally revisiting pain. Many people do not even realize how attached they have become to suffering itself. Without the familiar thoughts, they no longer know who they are. So the mind keeps returning to old emotional patterns automatically. But awareness changes this. Awareness helps you notice the attachment while it is happening. You begin seeing how the mind clings to certain thoughts, how it keeps searching for emotional pain even during peaceful moments, how it interrupts silence with memories, fear, and overthinking. And for the first time, instead of automatically following the thought, you simply observe it. You allow it to come. You allow it to pass, without fighting it, without feeding it, without becoming trapped inside it. This is where healing quietly begins. Not through controlling every thought, but through loosening your attachment to them. The peaceful mind is not a mind that never experiences negative thoughts. The peaceful mind is a mind that no longer builds a home inside every painful thought that appears. And slowly, the more you let go, the more space opens inside you. More silence, more lightness, more emotional freedom. You stop carrying every memory like a burden. You stop dragging the past into every new moment. You stop allowing old thoughts to decide your current peace. And one day, you suddenly notice something beautiful. The mind that once felt unbearably heavy has become quieter, softer, calmer, not because life became perfect, but because you finally stopped clinging to every thought that was hurting you from within. And perhaps this is one of the greatest freedoms a human being can experience. The ability to remember the past without becoming imprisoned by it. The ability to feel emotions without drowning inside them. The ability to let thoughts pass through the mind like wind through an open sky, without allowing them to steal your peace anymore. The mind keeps chasing more because it does not know how to feel whole. The human mind is always searching for something better, something bigger, something that promises peace, happiness, or emotional completion. It constantly whispers, if I achieve this, then I will finally feel calm. If I get more money, then I will finally feel secure. If this person loves me, then I will finally feel complete. If my future becomes perfect, then I will finally stop worrying. And because of this, most people spend their entire lives chasing success, chasing approval, chasing validation, chasing relationships, chasing attention, chasing the next achievement that they believe will finally silence the emptiness inside them. But the painful truth is, the mind rarely stays satisfied for long. The moment it achieves one desire, it quickly creates another. You finally reach one goal, and suddenly the mind says, now you need more. You finally receive love, and the mind becomes afraid of losing it. You finally achieve success, and the mind starts comparing itself to someone higher. This is why so many people secretly feel exhausted even after getting what they once desperately wanted. Because the mind itself does not know how to rest. It keeps moving from one craving to another, one attachment to another, one emotional dependency to another. Buddhism teaches that this endless chasing is one of the deepest causes of suffering, because the mind believes peace exists somewhere outside itself, somewhere in the future, somewhere in achievement, somewhere in possession, somewhere in another person. But external things can only create temporary pleasure, not lasting peace. Pleasure comes and goes. Excitement rises and fades. Success feels powerful for a moment, then the mind becomes restless again. That is why people can have beautiful homes, money, relationships, fame, or status, and still feel emotionally empty inside, because the outer world may change, while the inner chaos remains untouched. The mind keeps asking for more, because it secretly believes something is missing inside, and this feeling of inner lack becomes the force driving endless desire. Look carefully at modern life. People are constantly distracted, constantly consuming, constantly upgrading, constantly chasing stimulation. Yet many hearts have never felt more restless, because no amount of external achievement can permanently calm an uncontrolled mind. An anxious mind will remain anxious even inside luxury. A fearful mind will continue creating fear even after success arrives. A restless mind will keep searching for problems even during peaceful moments. This is why Buddhism teaches that true peace cannot be found through endless craving, because craving itself creates inner tension. The more desperately the mind wants something, the more emotionally dependent it becomes on outcomes, and dependence creates fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of not getting what the mind desires. This is why people suffer before things happen, while things happen, and after things happen. The mind never truly relaxes. It keeps saying, just one more thing, just one more achievement, just one more answer, just one more reason to feel complete. But completeness never arrives through endless chasing, because the mind is trying to solve an inner emptiness with external experiences, and external experiences always change. Everything in life changes. Beauty changes, relationships change, money changes, circumstances change, even emotions change. So if your peace depends entirely on things outside yourself, your peace will always feel fragile. Buddhism teaches something very different. It teaches that peace begins when the mind stops searching for completion in every external thing. When you stop believing happiness lives somewhere far away from this moment, when you stop making your worth dependent on constant achievement, when you stop needing the world to endlessly confirm your value. This does not mean you stop having goals. It does not mean you stop improving your life. It simply means your inner peace no longer depends completely on outcomes. Now success becomes something you enjoy, not something you emotionally need in order to feel whole. Now love becomes something beautiful, not something you desperately cling to out of emptiness. Now achievement becomes part of life, not your entire identity. And slowly, something inside you begins changing deeply. The constant pressure softens, the endless craving weakens, the emotional hunger inside the mind becomes quieter. You begin enjoying simple things again, a peaceful morning, a silent walk, a calm breath, a conversation without needing validation, a moment where nothing extraordinary is happening, yet your heart still feels calm. This is something many people never experience because their minds are always waiting for the next thing, always chasing another emotional high, always postponing peace for the future. But peace does not arrive in the future. Peace begins the moment the mind stops running endlessly away from itself. And perhaps this is one of the deepest Buddhist truths of all. You were never incomplete to begin with. The mind simply convinced you that you were. So it kept sending you into the world, searching for pieces of yourself in achievements, possessions, attention and approval. But the more aware you become, the more you realize something beautiful. The peace you were searching for outside was quietly waiting beneath the noise of the restless mind all along. And the moment the chasing slows down, the heart finally remembers what stillness feels like again. Silence feels uncomfortable because it exposes the chaos you've been escaping. Most people say they want peace, but very few people are truly comfortable with silence, because silence reveals things that distraction keeps hidden. The moment the noise disappears, the mind becomes louder. Unhealed emotions begin rising to the surface. Old memories appear. Fear appears. Loneliness appears. The emotional weight people spent years avoiding suddenly becomes visible. And this is why so many people unconsciously run away from silence every single day. The moment they wake up, they reach for the phone. The moment life becomes quiet, they search for music, entertainment, scrolling, conversation, or stimulation, not because these things are always bad, but because the mind is terrified of being left alone with itself. Modern life has made distraction feel normal. People are constantly consuming noise, constantly feeding the mind information, constantly keeping themselves mentally occupied. But underneath all that stimulation, many hearts are deeply tired, because endless distraction does not heal inner chaos. It only hides it temporarily. Buddhism teaches that silence is sacred because silence reveals the true condition of the mind. When everything becomes quiet, you finally begin seeing what has been controlling you internally. The fears you never faced, the pain you never processed, the emotional wounds you kept burying beneath busyness and distraction. At first, this can feel deeply uncomfortable, because many people have spent their entire lives escaping themselves. They know how to stay busy. They know how to stay distracted, but they do not know how to simply sit quietly with their own mind. And the moment silence arrives, the restless mind immediately starts searching for escape. It says, check your phone, turn something on, think about something, do anything except stay here quietly. Because silence removes distraction, and distraction was protecting the mind from seeing its own chaos clearly. Think about how difficult it has become for many people to sit alone without stimulation for even a few minutes. No scrolling, no entertainment, no noise, no mental escape, just silence, just awareness, just the raw experience of being present with themselves. For many people, this feels almost unbearable, not because silence is dangerous, but because silence exposes the emotional storms hidden beneath the surface. It exposes anxiety, it exposes emptiness, it exposes unresolved pain, it exposes the constant restlessness of the mind itself. But Buddhism teaches something very powerful. Silence is not your enemy. Silence is the mirror. It reflects the condition of your inner world. And although this truth may feel uncomfortable at first, it is also deeply healing, because healing cannot begin while you are constantly running away from yourself. The pain you avoid silently controls you. The emotions you refuse to face quietly shape your life from the shadows. The fears you keep escaping continue living inside the mind unresolved. This is why stillness is so important in Buddhist practice, not because silence magically removes suffering overnight, but because silence allows awareness to finally see suffering clearly, and awareness is where transformation begins. The moment you stop running, you begin understanding yourself differently. You begin noticing how noisy the mind has become, how addicted it is to stimulation, how quickly it jumps from one thought to another without rest, how deeply uncomfortable it feels in stillness. But if you remain patient, something beautiful slowly begins happening. the mind starts slowing down. Not immediately, not all at once, but little by little, the mental noise becomes softer. The emotional storms lose intensity. The endless need for distraction weakens. And beneath all the chaos, you begin discovering a quietness that was always there underneath the noise. A calm awareness untouched by fear, untouched by overthinking, untouched by emotional confusion. At first you only feel it for a few moments, a small moment of stillness, a brief moment where the mind becomes quiet. But slowly, those moments begin growing, and for the first time in years, you experience what true inner peace actually feels like. Not excitement, not temporary pleasure, but deep calmness, the kind of calmness that does not depend on external conditions, the kind of peace that remains even when life is imperfect. This is why Buddhist monks spend so much time in silence, because silence reconnects you to awareness, and awareness reconnects you to reality itself. In silence, you stop being hypnotized by the endless movement of the mind. You stop reacting automatically to every thought. You stop feeding every emotional wave. You begin observing instead of escaping. And eventually, silence no longer feels uncomfortable. It begins feeling sacred, peaceful, safe, like returning home after years of being lost inside mental noise. You begin enjoying simple, quiet moments again, watching the sky, listening to rain, walking slowly, breathing consciously, sitting peacefully without needing constant stimulation to feel alive. And perhaps this is one of the deepest truths most people never realize. The peace you have been searching for was never hiding inside noise. It was waiting quietly underneath it. But you could only hear it once you finally stopped running from silence. True freedom begins the moment you stop obeying every thought inside your mind. Most people spend their entire lives obeying the mind without realizing it. A thought appears, and immediately they follow it. The mind says, something bad is going to happen, and fear takes over the body. The mind says, you are not enough, and self-doubt quietly destroys confidence. The mind says, they are judging you, and anxiety begins controlling every interaction. The mind says, you will never heal, and hopelessness slowly enters the heart. This happens every single day to millions of people. Not because every thought is true, but because the mind has trained them to believe every thought automatically, and this unconscious obedience becomes an invisible prison. The mind creates fear, then forces the body to suffer from that fear. The mind creates painful stories, then emotionally traps the person inside them. The mind predicts disaster, and the heart begins living inside anxiety before anything even happens. This is why Buddhism teaches that true freedom is not about controlling the world. It is about no longer being controlled by the mind itself. Because the moment you believe every thought automatically, your inner peace becomes fragile. One negative idea can destroy your mood. One memory can steal your sleep. One fearful thought can ruin an entire day. And slowly, life becomes emotionally exhausting. Not because reality is always painful, but because the mind never stops creating noise. Most people think freedom means being able to do whatever they want externally. But Buddhism points toward a deeper kind of freedom. The freedom to experience thoughts without becoming imprisoned by them. The freedom to remain calm even while the mind creates emotional storms. The freedom to observe fear without immediately surrendering to it. This changes everything, because now, when fear appears, you notice it, but you do not immediately become it. When anger appears, you feel it, but you no longer allow it to completely control your actions. When sadness appears, you give it space without drowning inside it. This is the power of awareness. Awareness creates distance between you and the thought. Before awareness, the mind controlled your entire emotional state. Now there is a pause, a small space, a moment where you can simply observe. And inside that observation, freedom quietly begins growing. You begin realizing something powerful. Thoughts are temporary. They rise. They stay for a moment, then they disappear. Even the darkest thoughts eventually pass. But when you constantly react to them, feed them, fear them, or believe them completely, you give them power over your life. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like the weather. Some days there are storms. Some days there is sunshine. Some days there is confusion. Some days there is peace. But awareness is like the sky itself. The sky remains open no matter what weather passes through it. In the same way, your awareness remains untouched beneath every emotional experience. Once you understand this deeply, the relationship with your mind begins changing forever. You stop fighting every thought. You stop panicking every time fear appears. You stop believing that every emotion defines who you are. Instead, you begin allowing thoughts to pass naturally without building your identity around them. This does not mean life becomes emotionless. You still feel sadness. You still feel pain. You still experience difficult moments. But now there is wisdom inside the experience. Now there is awareness instead of unconscious reaction. Now there is calm observation instead of emotional chaos. And slowly, the mind loses the power it once had over you, not because thoughts completely disappear, but because you stop obeying them blindly. This is where real inner freedom begins. Not through forcing the mind to become perfectly silent, not through controlling every emotion, but through understanding that you are bigger than the thoughts passing through your mind. You are the awareness observing them, and the more connected you become to that awareness, the lighter life begins feeling. The fear loses intensity. The overthinking slows down. The emotional suffering softens. You stop carrying every thought like a burden. You stop reacting to every mental movement as if it were absolute truth. You stop living as a prisoner inside your own head. And perhaps for the first time in years, you finally experience moments of real peace. Moments where the mind becomes quiet and life feels simple again. The sound of rain becomes enough. A deep breath becomes enough. Silence becomes enough. The present moment becomes enough. And slowly, you realize something that Buddhism has been teaching for centuries. Freedom was never about escaping the world. Freedom was about escaping unconscious attachment to the mind. Because the greatest prison was never outside you. It was the voice inside your head that you believed without question for your entire life. But now, you are beginning to wake up from it. Now you are becoming aware. Now you are no longer automatically obeying every fear, every story, every insecurity, and every illusion created by the restless mind. And in that awareness, a new life quietly begins. A calmer life, a lighter life, a more peaceful life. A life where thoughts no longer rule your existence. A life where awareness finally becomes stronger than the noise. And that is the beginning of true inner freedom. So now, take one slow breath and notice something. The mind is still speaking, but you are no longer completely trapped inside it. For the first time in a long time, you can see it clearly. All those years of overthinking, all those nights filled with fear, all those moments where your own thoughts stole your peace, they were never the true you. They were only movements of the mind, temporary storms passing through awareness. And maybe that changes everything. Because if thoughts can be observed, then thoughts cannot be who you truly are. Deep beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the endless mental chaos, there is still a quiet part of you that has never been broken. A peaceful awareness that has been waiting patiently underneath all the overthinking. And no matter how lost you have felt, you can always return to it, right here, right now. Not by controlling every thought, not by forcing the mind to become perfect, but by no longer believing every fearful story the mind creates. This is where healing begins. This is where suffering slowly loses its power. And this is where inner peace quietly returns. So tonight, stop fighting yourself for a moment. Stop carrying every thought like a burden. Stop trying to solve your entire life inside your head. Just breathe. Just be here. Just allow this moment to exist without resistance. Because life was never meant to be lived entirely inside the mind. Life was meant to be felt, seen, experienced, loved. And the more present you become, the more you realize how much beauty was waiting outside the prison of thought all along. The sky, the silence, the breath, the simple peace of being alive. It was always here. You were simply too lost inside the noise to notice it. But now, something inside you is waking up. A deeper awareness, a calmer presence, a quieter heart, And from this moment forward, you do not have to keep obeying every thought that enters your mind. You can observe, you can let go, you can return to the present again and again until peace no longer feels distant but becomes the natural state of your being. And perhaps that is the true meaning of Buddhist wisdom, not escaping life, but finally becoming awake enough to truly live it. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, then take a moment tonight to sit quietly with yourself, not to fix everything, not to force your mind to become silent, but simply to observe, because awareness is where peace begins. And if you are walking this path of inner healing and awakening, make sure to subscribe to Zen Path of Realization for more peaceful Buddhist teachings about the mind, overthinking, detachment, inner peace, and spiritual freedom. May your mind become lighter, may your heart become quieter, and may you slowly rediscover the peace that was always within you.